Clara. Just my name. Low, steady, almost swallowed by the jazz and clinking glasses. But something about the way he said it made the air around me still. I turned, wine glass paused midair. Adrian Lynn. Jonah's mentor, co-founder of the firm. A man who, until now, had been little more than a polite nod across event rooms. I was wondering, he began, voice softer now, if I could have a word, privately. Privately? That word hit differently. And suddenly I wasn't sure if it was the music that got quieter or if it was just something in me. Yes, of course, I said, too quickly. He didn't explain. Just turned and walked toward the corridor. I followed, past chandeliers still glowing gold over rows of executives and designer dresses, past Jonah, who was deep in some story I'd already heard twice this week. He didn't notice me leave. The hallway dimmed as we moved away from the gala. Our steps echoed over polished concrete, each one sharpening the silence. Adrian stopped beside a narrow door. It's quieter here. I hesitated. Just for a breath. Then stepped in. It was a lounge, warm, low-lit, modern. A quiet fireplace flickered behind glass. 2 leather chairs faced each other like they'd been waiting. I Saturday. And instantly regretted it. Something in my chest fluttered unease, maybe. Or recognition. Because he hadn't said a word yet, but I already felt like something irreversible had begun. He sat across from me, hands clasped lightly, expression composed. Almost too composed. Was I pulling you away from anything important? No, I said. Just, wasn't expecting this. He nodded, then took a breath. The kind you take before saying something that's been sitting for too long. I wasn't sure there'd be another chance to speak with you. That shifted the air again. He studied me, not in the way people do when they're being polite. In the way people do when they're about to shift your reality. It's about Jonah. The name didn't land gently. It sat between us, heavy, like a file placed on a table no one asked for. I didn't move. Just felt my fingers tense on the leather armrest. Is something wrong? His pause was precise. Not too long. Just long enough to say, yes. But not in the way you think. Not wrong, he said. But something you deserve to know. And before I could ask what, before I could even react, I realized I hadn't been breathing. He leaned forward slightly. Just, listen, okay? Don't react. Not yet. There it was. Not a warning. Not a threat. An invitation to hear something that might change everything. And the worst part? I already knew I would. There was a time when silence meant something else. When Jonah's quiet wasn't distance, it was comfort. Sunday mornings used to carry the scent of orange peel and coffee, the low murmur of the radio, his half-finished crossword tilted beside my folded laundry. It wasn't exciting, but it was ours. Back then, I believed love meant reliability. A man who rotated the tires and remembered to turn off the porch light. Who didn't raise his voice. Who never forgot my birthday, even if the card was always the same 4 words. And I loved him for that. At least, I tried to. Because structure is easy to hold on to. Even when the warmth slips through the cracks. I told myself affection doesn't need to sparkle. That a kiss on the cheek counted. That saying thank you was enough, even if it sounded more like routine than feeling. I counted the little things like currency. His neatly pressed shirts. His favorite roast on Tuesday mornings. The way I kept the fridge stocked with that brand of mustard he never mentioned but always reached for. But lately, I've noticed the fade. The way he nods without hearing. How he says, looks nice, like he's describing a lamp. The way his hand brushes my back out of habit, not presence. And I didn't say anything. Not because I was afraid he'd snap. But because I wasn't sure he'd even pause. So I adjusted. Smiled when I wasn't sure why. Stayed useful. Predictable. Silent. The kind of silence that used to mean peace. Now it just echoes. And then, tonight, Adrian looked at me. Not flirtation. Not threat. Just a man seeing someone who forgot she could still be seen. He watched me refill my own glass. Watched Jonah forget to pull out my chair. Watched the way I scanned the room and found no place to land. And something about that quiet lounge, its low light, its stillness, makes this whole moment feel like a held breath. Adrian hasn't spoken since the last sentence. But he doesn't need to. I can feel it building. The weight in his pause. The way his fingers twitch slightly before stilling again. He knows I'm not just Jonah's wife. He knows I've been performing contentment for years. And I think I'm done pretending the silence is enough. So I sit here, perfectly still, trying to read a man I barely know. While realizing he might know more about me than the one I married. Whatever he's about to say, it's already done something I didn't expect. It's made me want to hear it. Adrian's voice didn't rise. It didn't plead. It just landed. He doesn't appreciate you the way he should. That's all he said. And still, it echoed louder than any accusation. My body didn't move. But something beneath my ribs twisted tight and sudden, like an instinct I'd forgotten I had. I held still. Too still. A stillness that took effort. Across from me, Adrian didn't blink. He didn't rush to fill the silence, either. He let it hang. I met his eyes. Finally. Excuse me? It came out sharp. But thin. He exhaled slowly, like he'd rehearsed this part. I've known Jonah for over 20 years. Long enough to see the patterns. Long enough to notice when a man starts looking past someone, instead of at them. I opened my mouth. Closed it again. I wanted to say, that's not fair. I wanted to laugh, roll my eyes, deflect. But no sound made it out. Just the thud of my pulse in my ears. And my hand gripping the armrest like it could anchor me to the version of my marriage I'd carefully maintained. Adrian leaned in, not closer, not threatening, just more present. Solid. I've seen how Jonah talks about the firm. About real estate markets and performance curves. He lights up like he's 30 again. He paused. Then, softer. But I've never once seen that look when he talks about you. The blow didn't land in one place. It scattered chest, stomach, spine. He doesn't talk about me that way because we're private, I said. My voice was small. He nodded, almost respectfully. Maybe. But some things don't need full stories to be visible. To be visible for what? Adrian held my gaze. To notice who's vanishing. Something hollowed out inside me. A soft ache I'd pushed aside for years suddenly stepped forward, demanding space. And all at once, small moments began replaying. The way Jonah introduced me tonight, this is Clara, before turning away. The way his fingers brushed mine, not to hold, but to pass a wine glass. The way he thanked me for showing up. Like I was a guest. And Adrian had seen it. Not because he was looking for something. But because he was actually looking. I blinked. Slowly. My fingers were still clenched, nails faintly pressing into the armrest seam. I forced them to release, ashamed by the tremor in my hand. He didn't say more. He didn't have to. His silence was the kind that lets your thoughts complete the damage. I glanced down at my lap. My hands, folded, quiet, unremarkable. And for the first time, I didn't just wonder how long they'd been that way. I wondered who had taught them to stay that still. For the rest of that conversation, I wasn't really there. Not fully. The crackle of the fireplace filled the space between us, soft and mechanical. I felt the weight of my necklace pressing lightly against my collarbone. The silk of my dress clung to my legs as I tucked them tighter beneath the chair. Like I could fold myself small enough to vanish. Adrian didn't speak. Didn't clarify. Didn't chase the moment. And somehow, That made it worse. Because in that silence, the things I hadn't let myself admit started showing up. Uninvited. Sharp. Last week surfaced first. That hallway. The new dress. The way Jonah walked past, eyes locked on his phone. No glance. No pause. Just absence wrapped in routine. Then came that dinner. His colleagues laughing at something I said too loudly, if I'm honest, because I tried to feel present. Tried to feel real. Jonah smiled. Politely. But he never really looked. And then, this room. I remembered how I hesitated before following Adrian in. Like something deep in me already knew. Knew that this moment wasn't a detour. It was a mirror. I shifted in my seat. A subtle move, nervous, instinctive. As if movement might undo something that had already begun. Adrian finally spoke. Not a question. Not advice. Just 5 words. You deserve to be seen. No grand emotion. No dramatic flair. Just the truth. Unvarnished. Steady. And it cracked something in me. Not because it came from him. Not because it was romantic. But because it had been so long since anyone had said something that wasn't about being helpful, dependable, nice. Just me. And suddenly, I wanted to cry. Not a sob. Just the quiet ache of realizing how long you've gone unseen even by yourself. I swallowed hard. It didn't help. The lump had already formed. The ache already settled in. I don't know what to say, I whispered. You don't have to, he replied. And it didn't sound like surrender. It sounded like permission. Permission to just exist. I looked at the fire. Its flicker framed us in the reflection of the glass, 2 shapes, quietly suspended. His stillness. My uncertainty. A moment balanced between what had always been, and what might now be different. And that's when I felt it. This wasn't about Adrian. Not really. It was about me. And the version of myself I had so carefully, so graciously buried beneath routines and dinner parties and practiced smiles. She was waking up. Not loudly. Not defiantly. But with just enough strength to whisper. I'm still here. The gala had moved on without me. By the time I returned, the jazz had slipped into something slower, lazier. The laughter around the tables was looser now, conversation dipping into that late evening lull where elegance begins to fray. No one noticed I'd been gone. No one, except me. Except Adrian, though he didn't follow. He didn't glance back. Didn't watch me re-enter the room. But I still felt it. His absence had weight. Like the silence between us had left a fingerprint. Jonah stood exactly where I'd left him. Hands moving mid-anecdote. Smile steady. The same magnetic presence that had once drawn me in now played out like a polished routine. He saw me. Offered a nod. A small smile. Then turned back to his story. And it was fine. Familiar. Expected. Safe. But something inside me, something I hadn't heard from in a while, stirred. I stood there, beside him, for nearly a minute before I realized. He hadn't asked where I went. Didn't wonder. Didn't reach for my hand or scan my face for something new. And that, more than anything, told me everything. Later, as I made my way toward the bar for a glass of water, I caught the shape of Adrian's shoulder just a few feet away. Not close enough to start a scene. But close enough to feel it. That quiet acknowledgement of a moment that had mattered. He didn't speak. Didn't even hold the gaze long. Just offered a glance. And somehow, it was enough. Because in that single look, there was no performance. No expectation. Just recognition. He still saw me. Not through the lens of who I was supposed to be, Jonah's wife, the gracious attendee, the smiling +1. But as myself. And for a second, I forgot how heavy it was to be noticed. How foreign. How sharp. Later that night, we drove home in silence. Jonah kicked off his shoes, loosened his tie, and turned on the news. The soft hum of the television filled the room like nothing had shifted. But I had. In the bathroom, I washed off my makeup. My fingers paused over the necklace at my throat. I removed it slowly, folded my earrings into their tray, and stood in front of the mirror longer than necessary. Not to check. Not to fix. Just to look. Adrian wasn't there, but his words were. You deserve to be seen. And for the first time in years, the question I had never dared to ask rose quietly to the surface. Had Jonah ever really seen me at all? The next few days unfolded in quiet. Not tense, just hollow in the way routine begins to feel when you finally wake up inside it. Everything looked the same. Felt the same. Coffee still brewed by 6. Socks folded by color. Plates set in pairs, as if by instinct. Jonah was unchanged. He moved through our home with the ease of someone completely unaware that anything had shifted. But I had. And the shift wasn't loud. It was internal. Like the moment you realize the wallpaper you've looked at for years has started to peel. Silence felt different now. Heavier. Not hostile, just full of what wasn't being said. I started noticing small things. The way I modulated my voice when I answered him, smoothed it out like I was rounding off sharp edges. The way I smiled too quickly, like I was playing a version of myself on autopilot. I wasn't angry. I wasn't heartbroken. I was just awake. And in that clarity, Adrian lingered. Not physically. Not improperly. Just quietly present in the echo of what he'd said. He didn't call. Didn't text. But on Tuesday morning, when I picked up Jonah's phone left again on the kitchen counter, I saw a calendar alert blink across the screen. Lunch with Adrian, 12:30, Vincent's Bistro. Vincent's. 3 blocks from my favorite bookstore. I hadn't planned to be in that part of town. But when noon rolled around and I found myself heading that direction, I didn't turn away. I told myself I needed a new book. That the cafe across the street just had better coffee. That the seat by the window was the only one open. I told myself a lot of things. But then I saw them. Jonah, his back to me, shoulders relaxed, gesturing as he talked. Adrian, facing forward, hands loosely folded, a glass of water untouched in front of him. He was nodding politely. Listening. But I could tell his mind wasn't fully in the conversation. Because his eyes drifted. Not scanning. Not searching. But they landed on me. Through glass. Across traffic. In a coincidence that didn't feel like one. He didn't flinch. Didn't gesture. He just held the moment. A beat. Maybe 2. Then that soft, almost imperceptible smile. Not flirtatious. Not expectant. Just a recognition. The kind that says, I see you. And I won't speak unless you want me to. I looked away first. Not out of shame. Not even surprise. But because something stirred in me I hadn't felt in years. Not attraction. Not even connection. Recognition. Not of him. Of me. The part of me I'd almost forgotten. The part that hadn't been reflected in Jonah's eyes for a very long time. The part that still wanted to be known. Not for what I gave, but for who I was when no one was looking. That night, I couldn't sleep. Not because anything had happened. Not because something was wrong. But because something inside me had shifted too quietly to name, too deeply to ignore. Jonah lay beside me, already drifting. His breathing was even. Familiar. Safe. I stared at the ceiling. Headlights passed in slow arcs across the plaster, casting silver ribbons that crawled from corner to corner. I used to find that comforting. Now it just felt still. Not peaceful. Just paused. Like the whole room was waiting for something to be said that wouldn't be. I thought of Adrian. His smile. The restraint in it. How he didn't reach for more than what I was willing to offer. He just left space. And somehow, that small grace, his quiet seeing, felt more intimate than any touch I'd received in years. I turned onto my side, facing away from Jonah. Not to hide, but to face myself. The shape of me. The truth of me. And without planning to, I whispered aloud, barely more than breath. I don't think he sees me anymore. There was no bitterness in it. No anger. Just truth. Soft and raw. Like something that had waited in the walls of me for too long, finally slipping free. My voice cracked at the end. Unexpected. I pressed my hand to my lips, startled by how fragile it felt, like I'd broken a pact I didn't remember making. A pact to stay quiet. To keep the peace. To not want too much. But the moment passed. And I stayed like that. Hand resting gently over my mouth. Holding something I hadn't realized I'd lost. The next morning, nothing had changed. And everything had. I made coffee. Sorted laundry. Opened my laptop and replied to emails like always. But when I passed the hall mirror, something paused me. A stillness. A flicker of memory. And so I reached for a scarf I hadn't worn in over a year. A soft, cornflower blue one. Jonah used to say it reminded him of old pictures. He used to smile when I wore it. Said I looked like someone from a story. Today, he didn't notice. Didn't even glance up when I walked into the room. But I wore it anyway. Not for him. Not for Adrian. For me. Just to see how it felt. To show up in my own reflection. And recognize the woman staring back. Not for what she'd given. Not for how well she'd endured. But for still being there. Still quietly here. It didn't take long for reality to pull at the edges. Not loudly. Not cruelly. Just enough to remind me where I was. 3 days later, we had dinner with old friends. One of those semi-annual evenings Jonah never missed, button-down smiles, polite laughter, safe wine. The kind of night where the conversation swims in circles, real estate, school acceptances, travel photos filtered to perfection. I sat between Jonah and Marianne, who once told me I was gracious in quiet ways. Which, I've come to understand, is code for, you don't take up too much space. Jonah was effortless. Animated, generous with his charm, the version of him I'd always known how to support. I smiled when prompted. Laughed when it suited the rhythm. Passed the water. The bread. The time. It wasn't until dessert arrived, flourless chocolate something, that I realized I hadn't said more than 12 words that weren't replies. No one noticed. Not even Jonah. Especially not Jonah. On the drive home, I rested my hands in my lap and watched Seattle pass by in soft, rain-speckled light. The city blurred, a string of motion I wasn't part of. Jonah tapped the steering wheel in time with a classic rock track humming through the speakers. Everyone seemed in good spirits tonight, he said. I nodded. They always say you have such presence, he added after a beat. I think they really look forward to seeing you. Presence. The word scraped something inside me. Because no one had looked. Not really. And Jonah hadn't either. They do? I asked softly. Sure, he said, too casually. You're just easy to be around. I turned toward the window again. Pressed my fingertips to my thigh to stay grounded. Easy to be around. I didn't know why that stung the way it did. But it did. Because I didn't want to be easy. I didn't want to be background noise, pleasant, expected, forgettable. I wanted to be missed. To be seen. To be asked. Even just once. I stayed quiet the rest of the ride. Back home, I folded laundry with machine-like precision. The scent of detergent too sharp in the air. Colors sorted, corners aligned. Jonah passed behind me and kissed the top of my head. Soft. Routine. His version of care. My hands froze mid-fold. Not because I wanted more, but because I wasn't sure I'd always wanted so little. And that, more than anything, hurt the most. Not what was missing, but what I had stopped expecting. The next morning, I opened the blinds without thinking. Light spilled across the hardwood in soft, uneven streaks, wide and warm, like the room exhaled before I did. For a long moment, I just stood there. Bare feet against cool wood. Coffee warm in both hands. Watching dust drift lazily through the morning sun like it had something to say and all the time in the world to say it. In the other room, I could hear Jonah. The low murmur of his voice on a call. A half-hummed tune between email replies. Nothing new. Nothing wrong. And yet, something inside me didn't line up the way it used to. I wasn't aching. I wasn't afraid. Just altered. Like something internal had been rethreaded while I slept, and I was still adjusting to the way it tugged. I wandered to the hallway mirror. Not to fix anything. Not to check my face. Just to look. The woman staring back wasn't a stranger. But she wasn't someone I'd checked in on in a very long time. Her posture was still composed. But her gaze. It had shifted. Sharper. Clearer. Not harder, just unwilling to look away anymore. There was a steadiness I hadn't noticed before. Like she'd been waiting quietly for me to return. I touched the scarf at my neck. That soft blue one Jonah once said made me look like an old film still. It still smelled faintly of cedar, of drawer space and distance. I didn't adjust it. I didn't ask what it meant. I just left it on. Downstairs, Jonah's voice floated upward again. He was telling someone he'd be free by lunch. His tone was warm, practiced, unbothered. I didn't interrupt. Didn't ask who. Didn't need to. Instead, I sat at the edge of the bed and opened a new note on my phone. Typed one sentence. I'd like to meet you for coffee, if that offer still stands. I stared at it. It didn't feel reckless. It didn't feel brave. It felt honest. Like the first unfiltered breath after holding one in too long. I didn't hit send. Not yet. But I didn't delete it either. I let it sit there. Unsent. Unhidden. Unapologetic. Visible. Waiting. And that was enough. Not a decision. Not a declaration. Just a small space I'd carved out for myself. And for now, that was the most honest thing I could do. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and stay tuned for the next story.